Have you ever wondered how to display your textile art on the wall in a simple technique that really does showcase it so beautifully? There's lots of options, but this is one that I use, and in this video I'm going to show you how I mount my work onto cradle panels that shows them. It's a simple technique. It has many steps, but it's straightforward. So follow along as I go through and show you the steps. Our first step with the panel is to prepare it for putting the artwork on. I've taped the edge with just blue painter's tape to keep it clean and so no drips are coming down. I'm sealing the wood with a product called GAC 100. It's a primer, but it also the wood so that there's no acid coming through onto the fabric or the paper. You'll see in a minute why I'm talking about the paper. Just use an old brush. It's not like gesso where you have to make sure it's perfectly even. It's just getting the surface covered. I put on 2 coats. This is the second coat. While we wait for that to dry, we'll go on to working with the artwork. Here's my seascape. I've finished all the stitching. I'm ready now to move on to the next step, which is a multi-stage process of getting it onto the panel. I've trimmed any threads. This is the last point at which I can do anything to it. On the back, while it looks pretty messy, I have fused on 2 layers of fusible interfacing. I'm not worried about the threads underneath particularly. The panel is 11 by 14. This is about 16 by 16 or so. While I really like these faded edges, I find it generally really hard to get the right size for a panel. I have some other pieces that I'm working on that are the raw edges, but for this particular panel, I'm working a little differently. I've got the fusible on. I've cut my watercolor paper. It's just a regular, nothing fancy watercolor paper, larger than my panel. My panel's 11 by 14. This is about 16 by 12 or 13. I've made sure that it's larger all the way around. Now with a hot dry iron, I'm going to fuse this to the panel. I'm going to work first on this side, on the back side, just taking my time. You don't need steam, so turn that off. Now I'm going to do it from the front, press it from the front, but I'm going to put on some parchment paper. My iron has picked up a bit of fusible, so I'm going to keep it nice and clean on the surface. That's fused down well, and we'll move on to the next step. I have to figure out where I am going to make the first 2 cuts. I've built a frame and I'm looking at where I want to place those first 2 cuts. I don't want to go too far over. I just want to squeak that in. I want to get as much of the rocks as I can, because to me the focus is on this area and the sky is really secondary. And I'm also checking my horizon line, which is slightly skewed. I'm going to try and work with that. There, that's good. I've got the other shape here, which I know it's not a perfect right angle, but I know that this is totally accurate. I'm working off of this corner down here will be the corner that I put on the edge of the panel. I'm putting a pin in here and pushing it down to the back of the watercolor paper. I want to have a hole on the other side. I can't see it here, but I know there's a hole. I can feel it there. And then I'll take this away. I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to mark this spot as that corner edge. Now, because I have a horizon line, that becomes important when I'm cutting. So I've done the same thing with the pin here and here. And when I come to cut in this corner, I will reference that. At this point, I'm using the outside of my square because I can cut against it. There's the horizon, that's fine. And now I just start from the far end. So there's one side cut, and I'm going to turn it carefully. And now this side. I can see a bit of white there to trim off. There we have that corner. Now we're ready to put it onto the panel. Our panel is sealed and dried. My next step is to coat it with the matte gel. I want to make sure that I get a really good, even coat over the whole surface. After brushing the gel on, I go over it one way and then the other, just making sure that everything is coated. I don't put it on the back of the paper. I don't find that necessary. Now is time to angle it up to that corner. It doesn't have to be the bottom. It could be any other corner, but I seem to want lower right. Then I'm going to brayer it really well over and working from the middle to the outside. I see this corner is peeking up a bit, so a bit more gel. Sometimes it'll seep out the edges, and that's one of the reasons we make sure the tape is down. Even if after you remove the tape, there's still a bit of gel, you can generally cut it off pretty easily with one of the art knives. Now, the next step is to turn it over and again push down really well. Then a heavy weight. That's why 30,000 years of art comes in handy. But it's not quite big enough. I want something on this edge here. Here we have it all weighted down, and I'm going to wait at least 24 hours to make sure that the gel is completely dry before I go on to the next step. Let the piece dry underneath the tome of art, and I'm working on a smaller piece just to demonstrate the next steps. You can see where I have cut the two edges there. It's time to trim these two edges. A friend told me about how to use this kind of knife, and because I was saying that if I used a regular X-Acto knife or art knife, I tended to cut in, and I was cutting too much of the visible front, and it wasn't looking very clean. She said, because you've got a depth on the panel, you lengthen your blade so that you're not interfering here. I can use a higher angle and get right in close because I can go right against the edge of the wood. I start out and just following along. There, that side is cut. And now this one. I'm just going to make sure that I've got this very corner here cut. And I think because we're using the canvas, the threads tend to come off on the edges. You can see here how I need to go back and trim a bit more. There, that's nice and clean now. I've got a little bit here, so I'm going to just get a pair of scissors and trim that off just in this part here. So just use really fine, small, sharp-pointed scissors. My next step is to seal the edges a little bit with some matte gel, and I use my finger because then I have better control. And it's just going ever so lightly along the edge, and it just helps any stray threads. So I'll go and wash my hands, and we'll let that dry before the next step. I'm going to wax the edges, and I'm using paste wax and a soft dry cloth. I just pick up a bit and then rub it against the wood. This gives it a bit of a smoothness. It darkens it a wee bit, or just brings up the grain, I think. We're almost finished and the wax has dried. The next step is to label the work. I have a hard time getting in really tight, so I've made some labels and I've signed them, and I'm going to stick them on inside. This is acid-free glue stick, and right over the edges. That's why I have a piece of paper underneath. Then right into there. Hillside after rain. Now let's get it wired. I've marked 2.5 inches down. I'm using my awl rather than my good stiletto to just put a light hole in each side. This mark is a little too close in, but I'll put it there. I have some D-rings here. These are on a smaller size. You don't need great big heavy ones for something that's this weight. I don't like the screws that come with the D-rings, so I have some flathead screws. They're number 6 1/2-inch flat wood screws. Now the reason I like them is they have the flat head, so it doesn't stand out too much from the edge like a regular screw would that has a rounded head. I'm just screwing this in, and another one on this side. There's 2 D-rings, and I'm just going to take a rough amount of wire. This is plastic coated wire meant for picture hanging, And I found out a few years ago there is a specific way of doing the knot in here. It's down and around and back under and through this loop. So it should look like that. Now, how long should the next one be? Let's get it started. Down from the top, around. At this point, I decide how much I want. And you want enough so that the nail isn't going to be hitting here. So this gives you a good inch. The heavier the picture, the more attention you would pay to the length of the wire. Now I'm going in and back through, and I'm just holding that there. So that's very little weight to this picture. I'm going to wind the end around. If you pull on it, it will coil up to the knot. I don't like the end of the wire poking out, so I just cover it with a wee bit of masking tape. It's done.